Usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there's this expectation of absolute precision.
Right, yeah, like engineering.
Exactly. It's like you break your arm, you go to the hospital, and the x-ray shows that jagged white line on a black screen.
And the doctor just points at it and says, there it is. That's the problem.
Yeah, it's completely binary, clean, indisputable. But then if you take that exact same expectation of precision and step into the world of evolutionary biology or historical anthropology, modern social politics suddenly, that pristine x-ray machine is just completely broken.
They're totally broken, yeah.
We are looking at a diagnostic landscape of human civilization that is, well, honestly, it's incredibly murky.
It really is. It's the absolute definition of diagnostic muddy waters.
Right. We're trying to figure out what built our society, what sustains it, and what might be causing its, current structural fractures.
And every historian, every sociologist, they're essentially looking at the exact same set of human data, the same historical events, the same biology.
But they come away with wildly contradictory diagnoses.
Exactly. Completely different conclusions about what it all actually means.
And that is exactly where we are heading today. We are wading right into the deepest, muddiest waters of that whole debate.
We definitely are.
But hey, before we jump in, I want to quickly remind you to like and subscribe to the show. It genuinely helps us keep bringing you these custom-tailored deep dives.
Yeah, definitely hit that subscribe button.
You really won't want to miss what we have coming up. But for today, we are reviewing a highly provocative, deeply polarizing new ebook. It's titled Stone Age Mastery: How Our Ancestors Thrived and Conquered the World by Conrad Riker.
It's quite the title.
It is. And for those of you who want to follow along or maybe dig into the primary source yourself, this book is available right now on Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books.
Highly recommend checking it out if you want the full context, because, well, it is a fascinating read, but I think it's important to state right up front, this is certainly not a subtle text.
Not at all.
It is not playing coy with its intentions.
No, it really isn't. So the mission of today's deep dive is to completely unpack Riker's central thesis. And to put it simply, Riker is arguing that human institutions, our infrastructure, civilization itself, it was all built entirely by hardwired male biology.
Right. Primal instincts and a cold, hard evolutionary logic.
Exactly. And furthermore, he argues that all of this occurred long before these foundational systems were allegedly captured by modern feminists and Marxists.
Which, obviously raises an incredibly important question about how we interpret history.
Right.
But before we dive into the actual mechanics of his argument and the specific data he uses, I do need to set a very firm boundary for you, the listener.
Yeah, this is crucial.
The source material we are looking at today is fiercely political, it is highly controversial, and it takes direct, unapologetic aim at progressive, left-wing, and feminist ideologies.
Yeah, he pulls absolutely zero punches.
None. So we, as your hosts, want to make it explicitly clear that we are absolutely not taking a side here.
No, not at all.
Nor are we endorsing the viewpoints of the author. Our job today is strictly to impartially report the contents of this book.
Right. We just want to help you thoroughly understand the arguments, the historical perspectives, and the data contained in what is essentially, well, it's a red-pilled manifesto.
That's a good way to describe it. We are looking at the Manosphere worldview from a purely analytical perspective.
Absolutely. So whether you find yourself nodding along with Riker or you find his perspective completely outrageous and offensive, his book is an unfiltered, incisive look at evolutionary biology through a very specific lens.
And it's a major cultural touchstone right now, especially for men's rights activists and that whole demographic.
Exactly. So we need to understand exactly what it's saying. So let's just jump right into the fire, like literally.
Literally fire, yeah.
Riker's foundational premise is that modern society actively pathologizes traditional masculinity.
Right. He claims society is effectively gaslighting men.
Yeah, telling them that their innate drive to build, to lead, and to conquer is some sort of, quote, toxic disorder that needs to be cured.
But instead, he argues that masculinity isn't an arbitrary social construct at all. He claims it is a 2-million-year-old genetic program.
A genetic program, and he establishes this combative tone immediately. Write the preface.
Oh, yeah. Riker explicitly states he didn't write this book for academics. He didn't write it to be peer-reviewed by sociologists.
Definitely not.
And he certainly didn't write it to win any participation trophies in the modern culture wars.
Yeah, he actually calls the book a salvage operation.
A salvage operation for men who are tired of being shamed for their biological instincts.
The aggression in the opening pages is just palpable. It's clearly designed to weed out casual readers right away.
It really is.
But he grounds this aggression immediately in a discussion about human survival, specifically focusing on the biological necessity of fire.
Right.
And he pulls this incredible quote from an 1883 journal by a Wyoming trapper named Jedediah Flintlock McCraw. Do you have that quote handy?
I do, yeah. McCraw wrote in his journal, let me find it, okay, here. A man who can't spit sparks from damp tinder ain't worth the salt in his jerky.
Wow. It's such a stark, brutal way to look at human value.
It really is.
But Riker doesn't just use it as historical flavor, does he?
No, he uses it to pivot directly to modern physiological data.
Right. And what's fascinating here is how he bridges the gap between a 19th century fur trapper and modern endocrinology.
Yeah, he cites a survivalist group based out in Montana. They're known as the Pyro Bros.
The Pyro Bros. Okay.
Yeah. And according to the book, this group tracked the testosterone levels of their male members before and after a weekend of friction fire drills.
And just to clarify for the listener, a friction fire drill means making fire using just a bow, a wooden spindle, a hearth board, and some grit.
Right. Plus massive amounts of physical exertion and sweat.
Exactly. No matches, no lighters. It is grueling, highly technical physical labor.
It's exhausting. And the data Riker presents claims that after a weekend of this specific activity, these men experienced an average 70% spike in testosterone.
70%, that's huge.
Right. And Riker notes that while a modern general practitioner might look at a sudden 70% hormonal spike and call it, concerning or abnormal.
Our Pleistocene ancestors would just call it Tuesday.
Exactly. He frames fire building not as a chore, but as an ancient, primal, physical readiness training. Like, our bodies still remember it.
But I want to push back on this a little bit, or at least try to understand the mechanism here.
Sure.
Because Riker seems to view modern men as these apex predators who have basically been sedated and locked up in a corporate petting zoo.
That's an apt metaphor for his view, yeah.
But is he seriously suggesting that the mere act of spinning a stick to make fire literally alters a man's neurobiology and brain chemistry to that extreme of a degree? Like, how does that actually work?
Well, according to the evolutionary biology he cites, yes, it does alter chemistry. Riker leans heavily into the idea that hormones are not just chemical messengers.
Okay, what are they then?
He says they are structural engineers in the body. He actually describes testosterone as nature's CAD software, meaning computer-aided design.
Nature's CAD software. Wow, that's a fascinating metaphor.
It really is. And he backs it up with research from the University of Chicago.
What did they find?
He points to neurobiological studies showing that male fetuses, as young as 34 weeks in utero, are already exhibiting differences in how they process space.
Wait, before they're even born?
Yes. The research suggests that the right hemisphere of the brain, which handles spatial reasoning and three-dimensional rotation, it develops at an accelerated rate under high fetal testosterone exposure.
So they're literally wired for spatial processing differently from the start.
Exactly. As a result, these male fetuses are essentially mentally rotating objects before they're out of the womb, whereas female neonates, guided by a different hormonal wash, tend to develop faster in areas associated with facial recognition and social processing.
So, if I'm understanding this correctly, Riker is arguing that society is trying to run a heavy-duty spatial engineering industrial program on a modern social operating system that was just never built for it.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
We've kept the ancient hardware, but we're telling the software it's not allowed to run.
That is a perfect analogy for his thesis. And Riker connects this fundamental pre-birth biological divergence directly to male dominance in spatial reasoning and tool innovation throughout all of history.
Right.
He argues this neurological CAD software is the exact reason why medieval all-male blacksmith guilds were able to intuitively develop things like Damascus steel.
While female counterparts in the same era were historically more focused on, say, organizing community herb gardens or textile work.
Precisely. And to Riker, this isn't a symptom of some patriarchal conspiracy keeping women out of the forge.
He views it as divine biological specialization.
Yes, exactly.
And he extends this specialization to raw survival, too, right? He brings up the Hadza tribe in Tanzania.
Yeah, the Hadza. They're one of the last remaining true hunter-gatherer tribes on Earth, which makes them a favorite subject for evolutionary anthropologists.
Right. And what does Riker say about them?
He points out a specific statistic regarding their camps. He notes that when tribes had designated specialized male fire tenders who maintained the perimeter at night,
Yeah.
It resulted in 30% fewer hyena maulings within the camp.
Okay, I mean, I have to imagine there's some selection bias there, right? Or at least a lot of variables at play when it comes to wild hyena attacks.
Oh, absolutely.
Is he pulling peer-reviewed anthropology to prove that gendered roles specifically caused that drop, or is he just taking a correlation and making it fit his narrative?
That is a very fair critique, and honestly is one that his detractors frequently point out. Riker is absolutely cherry-picking a correlation to support his broader evolutionary math.
Okay, so it's a bit of a leap.
It is. But his interpretation of that data is that specialized gender roles, men maintaining the violent perimeter with fire and weapons, while women focus on gathering and child-rearing in the protected center, he says that's not oppression.
He argues it is a simple, ruthless, life-saving calculus.
Exactly. If you abandon the math, people die.
So, when a modern HR department looks at an all-male working group, say a group of engineers or coders, and they flag it as a toxic clique that needs diversity intervention.
Riker essentially imagines a 14th century swordsmith just laughing himself into a hernia at our modern stupidity.
Right, because he believes the literal operating system of civilization was coded by these high testosterone specialized groups of men working in unspoken unison.
Exactly.
Which provides a really seamless transition into how he views the actual physical building of our world.
Yeah, the architecture stuff.
Right, because if this is the biology, how did we get from guarding a fire in a cave to engineering skyscrapers? This leads into his concept of the architecture of mastery.
Yes, a big theme in the book.
His core claim here is that history's greatest structural and societal leaps forward were forged by men who traded tears for testosterone and committee minutes for conquest.
He places a massive emphasis on the concept of silent brotherhood. He spends a lot of time contrasting modern office culture, which he views as overly verbal, overly therapeutic, and highly feminized,
Right.
with traditional male workspaces. He uses the example of an Amish barn raising.
Oh, I've seen videos of that, where a community comes together to build a massive structure in a single day.
Yes, but Riker focuses specifically on the sound of that environment.
Yes,
At an Amish barn raising, you have dozens of men constructing a massive, complex, load-bearing structure, but it happened with almost zero talking.
Oh, wow. Yeah, they just work.
Exactly. There are no mission statements, no feeling circles, no long meetings about inclusivity.
It is pure, unspoken, synchronized action based on spatial intuition and hierarchy.
Right. And he then juxtaposes that silent efficiency with NIH data regarding daily word counts.
Wait, the National Institutes of Health tracks how many words people speak in a day.
Yeah, they've funded various sociological and linguistic studies over the years, and Riker cites data suggesting that the average male worker uses roughly 12,000 words daily.
Okay. And the women?
The female average is significantly higher, sometimes clocking in around 20,000 words, depending on the study.
Wow, that's a big gap.
It is. And Riker weaponizes this data to argue that the male brain is optimized for silent spatial problem solving, while the female brain is optimized for verbal consensus building.
And he basically argues that you can't build a load-bearing wall with consensus. You build it with math.
Yes, exactly.
He applies this with a really ruthless, biting critique of modern DEI diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, specifically in manual labor and craftsmanship.
Oh, he goes hard on that.
Yeah, the anecdote about the woke wrenches garage in Detroit is just wild. Is that even a verified story?
Well, it's an anecdote that gained a lot of traction in manosphere forums, which Riker treats as a case study.
Okay, so take it with a grain of salt.
Right. According to the book, in 2023, a progressive cooperative garage in Detroit attempted to operate with a perfectly gender-balanced mechanic team.
Explicitly prioritizing DEI over raw mechanical background.
Exactly, and the claim is that this team allegedly installed a Prius engine backward because they mistook the oil pan for a, and I'm quoting Riker here, patriarchal salad bowl.
A patriarchal salad bowl. I mean, it's written with this very aggressive, almost stand-up comedy level of sarcasm.
It really is. But he's using it as a Trojan horse to deliver what he claims is a serious OSHA statistic.
Oh, really? Underneath the sarcasm.
Yeah. He cites a claim that 91% of industrial accidents occur when male workers are distracted by things other than the raw mechanics of the job.
Like what?
Specifically pointing to modern workplace training, interpersonal HR disputes, or having to accommodate less physically capable team members.
Wow. And he backs this up by crossing the Atlantic, too. He talks about a 2020 German toolmaker quota.
Yes. He states that a regional German manufacturing sector instituted a quota prioritizing gender pronouns and diversity metrics over traditional mechanical apprenticeships.
And what happened?
The book claims this resulted in a 212% spike in micro defects in the tools produced.
212%.
Yeah. And Riker writes, with heavy irony, that progressive blogs blame the defects on toxic metal, completely ignoring the absolute breakdown in the skill pipeline.
Toxic metal. It's definitely a deliberate framing to mock the concept of toxic masculinity.
Oh, without a doubt.
But what's interesting is he doesn't just isolate this to modern progressive politics. He traces this back historically to prove it's a structural law, not just some modern political grievance.
Right, he goes all the way back.
Yeah, he points to medieval York in the year 1376. What happened there?
According to historical guild records, the City Council of York issued what Riker calls an early diversity edict. They forced changes upon the local Masons guilds, attempting to break up their insular, all-male hiring practices to include unapprenticed labor favored by the local lords.
And Riker claims the result was a catastrophic drop in masonry quality, right?
Yes, culminating in church roofs that leaked so profusely that monks were accidentally baptizing themselves while trying to pray in the rain.
That is a hilarious mental image, but the council blamed the Masons for sabotaging the work, right?
They did. The political class blamed the workers for male sabotage and obstinance. But Riker argues that physics, gravity, and water simply do not care about your equality mandates or your political edicts.
Right. The men who actually understood the geometry of a keystone were pushed out and the structures collapsed.
This is a cornerstone of his philosophy. Biology and physics are binary, and they are unforgiving.
He illustrates this with an experiment that I found really hard to believe. The UCLA birdhouse versus the Yale woodshed.
Ah, yes.
This sounds like an urban legend. What is the actual methodology here?
He presents it as a behavioral study. The claim is that a diverse, gender-balanced, highly educated committee at UCLA was tasked with designing and building a simple birdhouse.
Okay.
And according to Riker's framing, they spent 3 days arguing over the design aesthetics, debating the environmental impact of the wood, and complaining about getting splinters.
Liquors. Right.
In contrast, a group of male forestry students at Yale were given raw lumber and told to build a functional woodshed. Riker claims this group of silent men, operating on pure hierarchy and spatial intuition, built a structurally sound shed in under a few hours without a single planning committee meeting.
Okay, I have to interject here because if we're being analytical, that sounds incredibly anecdotal. It
Excuse-
sounds like a parable designed to confirm a bias rather than a peer-reviewed double-blind study.
Yeah.
Does he provide actual academic citations for this?
He cites an obscure sociological field test, but you are completely right to be skeptical. The academic rigor of that specific comparison is highly debatable, and critics argue it's a gross oversimplification.
Yeah, it definitely feels like it.
However, whether the anecdote is a rigorous scientific study or just an exaggerated parable, Riker uses it to establish a very specific theoretical framework that he calls the cathedral code.
The cathedral code. Explain that because it seems to be the linchpin for how he views modern infrastructure.
The cathedral code is Riker's theory that enduring civilizations are built on a specific, uncompromising masculine architecture.
Okay.
He argues that the all-male guilds that built structures like Notre Dame designed them to outlast empires.
And how did they do that?
They achieve this through rigid hierarchy, absolute mathematical precision, and what he calls silent mastery.
And he contrasts the cathedral code with what he labels feminist architecture, which I assume he doesn't mean as a compliment.
Far from it, no. He points to modern examples of spaces designed with equity and feelings in mind, rather than load-bearing reality.
Like what?
He cites gender-neutral Ivy League dorms, which he claims devolve into chaotic, unmanageable environments that male students actively flee from within months because they lack order and hierarchy.
Wow.
He also brings up a fascinating case study in Sweden, the city of Plania.
What happened in Plania?
Plania was heavily publicized as a radical gender-equal urban planning experiment. The architecture and city layout were allegedly designed entirely around feminist principles.
What does that mean for a city?
Removing hierarchical sightlines, prioritizing communal gathering spaces over efficient transit arteries, and blurring the lines between private and public space.
Okay, so making it softer, more community-focused.
Exactly. But Riker claims the city experiment was an absolute disaster, completely abandoned by its residents after 2 years, and was eventually overrun by raccoons.
Raccoons. Nature's ultimate squatters, he calls them.
Yes, exactly.
So his thesis is that when you prioritize aesthetics and inclusivity over the cold, hard, binary levels of physics, Structural collapse isn't just a possibility, it is a mathematical inevitability.
Exactly. And he grounds this in a final sweeping statistic for this section, noting that currently roughly 90% of structural engineers globally are male.
90%.
Right. And he argues that when modern governments try to deconstruct that disparity through diversity quotas, you end up with fragile infrastructure designed by people who are terrified of load-bearing walls.
Okay, so we've established fire as the biological catalyst and silent hierarchical building as the method.
Right.
But as you read further into this book, there is a much darker thread running through his theory of civilization.
There is, yeah. It gets intense.
It isn't just about building, it's about what you have to endure to be worthy of building. Let's transition into physical pain.
This is a heavy section.
Riker asserts that modern comfort breeds catastrophic weakness, and that surviving extreme, agonizing pain is the ultimate, non-negotiable resume for leadership.
This is where the book becomes quite graphic.
Yeah.
In Chapter 19, Riker does a deep dive into the historical prevalence of extreme pain in male rites of passage.
Yeah, some of these examples are tough to read.
He describes accounts from anthropologists in 1920s Australia who observed Aboriginal initiation rites. Young boys were circumcised using unsterilized, sharpened rocks.
And the key detail Riker emphasizes is that these boys displayed zero flinching.
None. They were socially and biologically conditioned to absorb the agony in absolute silence.
And he traces this back even further, right, to ancient Egypt.
Yes, he notes that 3,000 years ago, Egyptian teenagers were given the flint knife treatment in public ceremonies, while priests chanted over them, declaring them men only after they survived the blood loss and the pain.
Not a participation trophy in sight, is how he puts it.
Right.
But here's what I need to understand. It's easy to look at that and just call it barbaric ancient torture.
Sure.
But Riker doesn't see it as arbitrary cruelty. He actually ties these brutal rituals to a distinct evolutionary and biological advantage. What is the science behind enduring that kind of trauma?
He cites a 2018 study conducted by the U.S. Army.
Okay, what did they find?
The study analyzed infection rates among recruits operating in extremely unhygienic, muddy, blood-soaked trench conditions. The data showed that circumcised recruits had 23% fewer infections in those specific brutal environments compared to uncircumcised recruits.
So he's arguing that these ancient tribes weren't just being sadistic. They were performing preventative battlefield medicine based on an intuitive understanding of survival math.
Precisely. And he takes the biological argument even further. He states that testosterone literally acts as an analgesic.
Like a painkiller.
Yes, it numbs nerve endings in the male body during times of extreme stress. Evolutionarily, this was absolutely essential.
Right, because if you are a prehistoric hunter who has just been gored by a boar, you cannot stop to process your emotional trauma.
Exactly. You have to track that wounded prey for another 10 miles, or your entire tribe starves to death. The ability to compartmentalize and endure physical agony is, in Riker's view, the defining feature of the male operating system.
And he extends this extreme pragmatism to the history of medicine itself. He brings up an archaeological find, a 7,000-year-old Peruvian skull.
Yes, a skull discovered with 5 distinct healed trepanation holes.
Meaning someone literally drilled or scraped holes into this man's skull.
Exactly. And the fact that the bone shows signs of healing means the patient actually survived the procedure.
Which is insane to think about.
Riker uses this to illustrate a stark point. Ancient men did not sit around waiting for a self-care seminar or a mental health day when they suffered a traumatic head injury or severe intracranial pressure.
No. Another man picked up a sharply napped rock, physically pinned his brother down, and performed awake, unanesthetized brain surgery.
It's mind-boggling to even conceptualize the psychological fortitude required to be the patient or the surgeon in that scenario.
It is a profound contrast to modern medical sensibilities, which prioritize patient comfort above almost all else.
Riker shares another anecdote to hammer this home, fast-forwarding to 1873. He talks about an American frontier doctor named Horace Bonesaw Johnson.
With a nickname like Bonesaw, you know this isn't going to be a gentle story.
It really isn't. Dr. Johnson reportedly used a rusted carpentry hacksaw and a jug of homemade moonshine to amputate shattered limbs on the battlefield.
Oh, man.
And despite the horrifying lack of sterilization by modern standards, Riker claims Johnson achieved a survival rate that would make modern robotic surgery protocols look inefficient and overly bureaucratic.
Okay, but I have to ask, Riker seems to deeply romanticize this extreme, almost sociopathic level of suffering. He talks about hacksaws and sharpened rocks with this weird reverence.
He does, yeah.
Is he suggesting that without these brutal, bloody rites of passage, modern society is structurally doomed? Because I don't think anyone wants to go back to awake brain surgery with a rock.
Right. He isn't necessarily arguing that we should abandon anesthesia. What he is arguing is that pain serves as an essential, irreplaceable tribal filter.
Okay.
Riker's core argument in this section is that modern men are fundamentally starved of the rites of passage that historically burned away childhood weakness and forged boys into warriors.
So because we don't have the flint knife anymore, men are psychologically malfunctioning.
That's his diagnosis. He points to elite military training as the last vestige of this. He compares Navy SEAL Hell Week, which involves 62 hours of sleep deprivation, hypothermic ice baths, and carrying massive logs until your bones stress fracture,
Just brutal stuff.
to the Maasai lion hunts in Kenya. Both are designed to push the male body to the absolute brink of systemic failure to see if the mind breaks first.
And how does he contrast that with the average modern man?
Brutally. He says that because society has outlawed physical trials, today's men are forced to seek out synthetic pain.
Synthetic pain.
He claims this is why millions of men play punishing video games like Dark Souls, dying 1,000 virtual deaths against impossible digital bosses, just to trick their brains into feeling a fraction of that primal evolutionary achievement.
Wow. And his mantra for this entire concept is just, let me get this quote: no pain, no gain, no trial, no tribe, no blood, no throne.
No blood, no throne.
It's incredibly bleak, but it lays out exactly how he thinks the hierarchy is established. So the operating system requires physical dominance, and it requires enduring immense pain.
Right.
But it also requires pointing that hardened biology outward into the abyss. Which brings us to how men conquer the unknown.
This next part is fascinating.
Riker frames scientific discovery and exploration not as some enlightened, collaborative, peaceful academic pursuit, but as a violent, direct extension of the male hunting instinct.
He makes a compelling, if controversial, statistical argument here. He notes that NASA's astrophysics workforce is currently 72% male.
Okay.
Now, a modern sociologist would look at that number and immediately diagnose it as systemic bias and patriarchal gatekeeping that needs to be dismantled.
Right, that's the standard view.
But Riker looks at that exact same number and says it's a feature, not a bug. He claims that ratio has remained relatively unchanged since Babylonian astrologers were first mapping the transit of Jupiter millennia ago.
So he's saying that the desire to map the stars is a biological imperative, not a social construct?
Yes. He argues that the cosmos, like the jungle, is a harsh, unforgiving environment. It rewards those who calculate risk with cold, detached logic, not those who focus on inclusive feelings.
He illustrates this with this hilarious but honestly kind of poignant anecdote about 4 drunk engineers in a Montana garage.
It's a great story. According to Riker, these 4 engineers were playing poker, having more than a few drinks, and tinkering with household electronics.
Classic garage stuff.
Right. And through sheer unstructured male tinkering, they ended up duct taping a GoPro camera to a Roomba vacuum cleaner.
And in doing so, Riker claims they accidentally engineered a prototype that mirrored NASA's cheapest Mars rover designs.
Exactly. And Riker's takeaway from this isn't just engineers are smart.
No, it's about the environment that fostered the invention. He points out that the secret to their success was that no one stopped the poker game to form a committee on inclusive innovation quotas.
They just identified a spatial problem, applied logic, and built it.
It underscores his deep belief in the power of unstructured, hierarchical male collaboration, and he loves to highlight moments where this raw understanding of physics violently collides with modern irrationality.
Oh, you mean the Buzz Aldrin incident?
Exactly. He points to the famous incident from a few years ago where a conspiracy theorist confronted astronaut Buzz Aldrin.
Getting right in his face and calling him a liar who faked the moon landing.
Right. And Aldrin, who was in his 70s at the time, responded by throwing a perfectly executed right hook straight to the man's jaw.
Just a straight right hook for science.
Riker calls that punch the ultimate expression of cosmic justice. It is the physical embodiment of his philosophy. Physics and reality will always eventually punch ideology and feelings in the face.
And this relentless drive to map reality, to conquer the physics of the world, wasn't just about looking up at the stars. It was about looking out across the oceans.
Right. If extreme pain tolerance was required just to survive childhood, it makes sense that these same men wouldn't hesitate to push their bodies into the literal unknown. Which brings us to the Polynesian navigators.
This is one of the most mechanically fascinating points in the book. The Polynesian navigators successfully mapped and crossed 2,000-mile expanses of open ocean in wooden outrigger canoes, long before the invention of the magnetic compass or the astrolabe.
And Riker highlights a very specific, intense biological detail about how they achieved this.
He does. He claims that these master navigators allegedly used testicular pain to gauge subtle shifts in deep ocean currents.
I remember reading that in the book and I involuntarily had to cross my legs. But how does that even mechanistically work? Is that actual science or just a wild legend?
It is rooted in the physics of ocean swells and human anatomy.
Okay, walk me through it.
The ocean produces deep, low-frequency resonant swells that travel for thousands of miles. When those swells hit the hull of a wooden canoe, they create a very subtle vibration. The navigators would sit on the lowest part of the hull. Because the male anatomy has highly sensitive nerve clusters located externally, specifically the testicles they could feel, the microvibrations and shifts in the water's temperature and pressure that were completely imperceptible to the hands or feet.
So they were literally using the most sensitive part of their biology as a highly tuned organic gyroscope.
Exactly.
It perfectly proves his point about male biology being a literal compass for human expansion.
And this kind of relentless, grueling expansion required an astronomical amount of fuel. Riker transitions from the navigation of the ships to the logistics of keeping the sailors alive.
Right, the food and drink.
He looks at the manifest of the USS Constitution during the War of 1812.
The numbers on this are staggering.
During a standard deployment, the crew of the USS Constitution consumed 1.2 million gallons of beer.
Over 1 million gallons.
When you break down the math on the crew size and the voyage length, that equates to roughly 18 pints of beer a day per man while they were actively operating a warship in combat conditions.
18 pints a day. If a modern naval crew drank like that, the ship would run aground in 10 minutes.
Right.
But Riker doesn't view this as a lack of discipline, does he? He connects it to biology.
He connects this massive consumption of alcohol, alongside vast quantities of salted meat, to the immense caloric density required to fuel the evolutionary expansion of the male brain.
Operating complex rigging, calculating artillery trajectories, and enduring the stress of combat required massive energy.
He argues that the ability to consume dense proteins and ferment grains into alcohol made these men evolutionary rock stars. They were biological engines burning high-octane fuel to conquer the globe.
And he actually brings in modern real estate data to argue that this respect for the biological engine is still hardwired into our modern DNA. He cites a study from Zillow, the real estate website.
Yes, a highly unusual data point. He cites a Zillow metric claiming that suburban homes with functional backyard fire pits or fireplaces have a 50% lower divorce rate than homes without them.
Which sounds completely absurd on the surface. Like, what does a fire pit have to do with marital stability?
Most sociologists would argue that a backyard fire pit is simply an indicator of higher socioeconomic status, which correlates with lower divorce rates.
But Riker rejects that.
He attributes this statistic to a primal genetic respect that women instinctively harbor for men who can control fire and provide a warm, defensible perimeter.
Wow.
He says the smell of wood smoke at the sight of a man intending a fire triggers a Pleistocene reaction in the human brain, signaling safety and evolutionary competence.
So it's like a genetic Pavlovian bell. A woman sees her husband chop wood and light a fire, and her 2 million-year-old brain says, okay, the hyenas aren't going to eat us tonight. This is a good mate.
Exactly. But if we pull back and look at the broader implications of Riker's argument, he posits that dominating the physical world, the oceans, the stars, the fire is only half the equation.
Okay, what's the other half?
For the male operating system, this hardwired instinct to conquer inherently bleeds over into dominating the spiritual and intellectual worlds as well.
Which brings us to the realm of mysticism, religion, and philosophy.
Right.
If men are wired to build physical cathedrals, how do they build spiritual ones? According to Riker, it's not because men are inherently more pious or morally pure. He points out a very dark statistic.
Yes, that 70% of all cult founders in recorded history are men.
Think of figures like Jim Jones or L. Ron Hubbard. Riker's interpretation of this is chilling. He says that men don't just want to submit and believe in a higher power, their biological imperative drives them to want to be the higher power.
They want to be the architect of the spiritual reality.
He illustrates this modern desire for spiritual command with a story about a Reddit user.
The legend of Diesel Bro 88.
Right. Who is this guy?
According to the lore on Prepper forums, Diesel Bro 88 was a relatively successful, normal guy who completely rejected modern therapeutic culture. He supposedly sold his shares in a yoga studio, moved to the absolute middle of nowhere in Montana, and personally welded an underground bunker.
And he didn't just hide down there, he built a following.
He commanded an online following of over 500 men, but he didn't do it through spiritual enlightenment or meditation.
How did he do it?
He commanded them through the raw, unapologetic stockpiling of ammunition, diesel fuel, and antibiotics. His core doctrine, which he preached to these men, was essentially, when the power grid inevitably dies, your therapist cannot save you, but my stockpile will.
Raker describes this mindset as decisive, unapologetic, male. He is equating spiritual leadership with raw logistical dominance.
Exactly.
And we see this desire for rigid, logical frameworks manifesting in the massive modern revival of Stoicism, don't we?
Absolutely. The book notes that over 4 million modern men are currently turning to the ancient writings of Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor and Stoic philosopher.
And Riker summarizes the appeal of Stoicism brutally. Crying in your Tesla because you feel unfulfilled won't fix your credit score and it won't protect your family. But a Spartan mindset might.
He views theology and philosophy not as tools for finding inner peace, but as weapons for enforcing tribal cohesion. And he backs this up with an evolutionary study on extreme religious rituals.
He cites a paper from PNAS, the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences.
Right. The study analyzed the historical impact of extremely violent, male-driven religious rituals. We're talking about Aztec priests performing human heart-ripping sacrifices, or Vikings executing the gruesome blood eagle ritual.
Just horrific stuff.
The data suggests that tribes which engaged in these highly traumatic, shared religious experiences boosted their tribal cohesion by up to 40%.
Wait, how does tearing a captive's heart out on a pyramid boost social cohesion? Wouldn't that just terrify everyone?
It does terrify them, and that is exactly the point. Psychologically, shared trauma is the strongest bonding agent known to humanity.
It creates an absolute, unquestionable in-group and out-group dynamic.
Yes, it signals to everyone in the tribe that their leaders possess the ruthless capacity for violence necessary to protect them from outsiders.
And Riker points out that Odin, the Norse Allfather, didn't hold space for his feelings to gain wisdom. Mythology says he gouged out his own eye and hung himself from the world tree for 9 days just to steal the secrets of the runes.
So Riker's analysis is that male-driven theology requires cold logic, Aristotelian systems, and a willingness to endure suffering. It explicitly rejects empathy.
Right. He argues that women's brains evolved to read faces and foster interpersonal harmony, which is vital for raising infants. But men's brains evolved to parse complex, rigid external systems.
Therefore, male-led religions grow rapidly because they offer a clear, divine chain of command. They offer order in a chaotic universe.
He actually brings the receipts on that claim by looking at modern church attendance, doesn't he?
He does. He compares two distinct religious demographics in the United States. First, he looks at the Southern Baptist Convention, which he notes is unapologetically patriarchal, hierarchical, and doctrinally rigid.
And they grew.
Riker points out that they added nearly 500,000 new members in a single year of his data set.
And he contrasts that with a more progressive denomination.
He contrasts it with the Unitarian Universalists.
Hmm.
Riker claims, again with his trademark sarcasm, that the Unitarians swapped traditional pulpits for inclusion workshops and trigger warnings.
And what are their numbers like?
He states they now average roughly 17 attendees per Sunday service, half of whom, he jokes, are emotional support therapy dogs.
It's a very pointed demographic contrast. He's using it to support his thesis that people and societies at large fundamentally crave hierarchy, order, and rules.
Right.
They do not crave hug circles, and when a religion devolves into a hug circle, it dies.
Exactly. Which brings us to the climax of the book. We've explored how fire built the biology, how silent mastery built the architecture, how pain filtered the weak, how exploration mapped the world, and how mysticism codified the rules.
Yeah, that's a lot.
The final section of his thesis is about the future. It's about legacy, fatherhood, and the existential battle between biological bloodlines and progressive ideology.
And he grounds this grand theory of civilizational survival in a very specific modern story about a father and a son, the story of Jim Bob Henderson.
Yes. Henderson is presented as the archetype of the necessary modern patriarch. According to the book, Henderson realized his 14-year-old son was becoming lethargic, anxious, and obsessed with social media.
So Henderson abruptly canceled the boy's internet access and deleted his TikTok account.
Right. And instead, he forced his son to spend every weekend learning the family trade. construction estimating.
So instead of watching short-form videos, this kid was learning how to calculate the load-bearing requirements for a roof truss. And how does that translate academically? Because Riker claims this resulted in a massive jump in the boy's SAT scores.
Riker states that the son experienced a 200-point jump in his SAT math score
How does measuring lumber improve an SAT score?
because it forces the brain to practice applied spatial reasoning in high-stakes, real-world environments. By the time the boy graduated high school, Riker notes, he can calculate roofing square footage and material costs faster than the computer. But more importantly, the boy had been reintegrated into the male hierarchy. Riker uses this to illustrate what he calls the Corleone principle.
Based on the character Vito Corleone from The Godfather?
Yes, specifically the quote. A man who doesn't spend time with his family can never be a real man.
But Riker strips the sentimentality out of it and turns it into economic and biological math.
Right. He argues that a father's active presence, specifically in enforcing discipline and teaching a trade, yields a massive, quantifiable lifetime return on investment.
He claims that every hour a father invests in direct boyhood mentorship yields a $12,000 lifetime ROI for that child in future earning potential and avoided incarceration costs.
And he contrasts this involved patriarchal mentorship with what he views as the progressive alternative. He uses a highly inflammatory term here, the marriage plantation.
He argues that modern family courts and progressive social policies treat men not as patriarchs but as a paycheck with a pulse.
He claims the state has attempted to replace fathers with state-run community mentors and social workers, an experiment he declares an absolute catastrophic failure.
This drive for legacy, this need to ensure the survival of the bloodline, gets aggressively biological as he moves toward his conclusion. Riker delivers what is essentially the biological punchline of the entire book.
It is a controversial distillation of evolutionary psychology. He writes, "Sperms swim, eggs wait."
It's right to the point. What does he mean by that in the context of civilization?
He means that the male biological imperative is inherently active, aggressive, and expansive. He points to data from a Copenhagen fertility clinic, which shows that over 90% of all voluntary genetic donors, meaning people willing to walk into a clinic and donate their genetic material, are men.
Interesting.
He uses this to argue that the male drive for legacy and biological immortality is an unstoppable force of nature, driven by the need to spread and conquer.
He contrasts this with what he calls the passive lottery ticket of the female genetic contribution, which evolutionarily involves heavy investment in a single offspring rather than expansive conquest.
He even takes a swing at how history is taught in schools today to prove this point. He actively tries to debunk historical matriarchal myths.
Yeah, he points out that modern feminist historians love to trot out Cleopatra as the ultimate girl boss icon of ancient history.
But Riker notes that the historical context is completely skewed. Cleopatra did not rule an egalitarian matriarchy. She was a member of the Ptolemaic line.
Wait, back up for a second. The Ptolemaic line, you mean she wasn't actually part of some ancient indigenous Egyptian matriarchy?
No, she wasn't. The Ptolemaic dynasty was a fiercely patriarchal, incestuous Greek Macedonian bloodline that conquered Egypt and was utterly obsessed with keeping power strictly in-house through brutal hierarchy and assassination. Riker calls her reign a temporary rental of a male-built empire. He contrasts her fleeting, politically chaotic rule with male pharaohs like Ramses the Great, who mobilized millions of tons of stone to build eternal monuments plastered with their own names, ensuring their legacy outlasted the sand itself.
But Riker sees a modern existential crisis threatening this entire legacy, doesn't he? He believes the hardware is finally breaking down. He points to a deeply concerning biological statistic: a 60% global drop in male sperm counts since 1973.
It is a well-documented and highly alarming medical phenomenon, though the causes are fiercely debated by scientists.
But Riker has a very clear diagnosis.
He does. He blames this catastrophic drop in male fertility on two things: a modern diet heavy in soy and phytoestrogens, which are plant-based compounds that mimic estrogen in the human body and can suppress testosterone production, and the omnipresence of endocrine-disrupting microplastics in our water supply.
So we are literally poisoning the hardware.
Yes. But he argues the biological poisoning is just a reflection of the cultural poisoning. He believes we live in a culture that metaphorically castrates male ambition at every turn.
He draws a historical parallel, stating that the Roman Empire ultimately fell when lead pipes made their ruling class sterile and insane, and he claims Western civilization is currently falling to the phytoestrogens in our Starbucks cups.
He pairs this biological decline with the collapse of our intellectual rigor. He points to the recent controversy where Stanford University considered canceling advanced calculus courses because the concept of objective, rigorous math was deemed too colonial and exclusionary.
Raker views this as the ultimate symptom of a dying society. When a civilization decides that math is racist, it loses the ability to build.
And he draws a chilling, very dark contrast with extremist groups like ISIS. He notes that while the American Psychological Association was busy publishing guidelines that literally labeled traditional masculinity as harmful and something to be treated, ISIS militants were conquering territory because they understand a fundamental ancient truth.
What's that truth?
Stone beats ideology.
Stone beats ideology.
Yes. Groups that weaponize traditional fatherhood, extreme physical sacrifice, and absolute hierarchy will always outcompete societies that prioritize comfort and inclusion.
Wow. Okay, so if we pull back and synthesize all of Raker's themes, the fire, the silent building, the pain, the exploration, the theology, and the legacy, he ties it all together with a barrage of sobering modern statistics about who actually keeps this fragile society running.
He forces the reader to look at the invisible, highly dangerous labor force that sustains the modern world.
Right.
He notes that currently 94% of pipeline welders are men, 90% of oil field workers are men, and most tellingly, 94% of all fatal workplace accidents happen to men.
And Riker frames these statistics not as an HR problem to be solved by OSHA regulations or diversity quotas. He frames it as the ultimate necessary male sacrifice.
Exactly. It is the blood sacrifice that keeps the power grid humming, the water flowing, and the bridges standing, while the progressive academic class sits in air-conditioned rooms complaining about the patriarchy in the dark.
His ultimate thesis, the entire book distilled into one brutal phrase, is this: women birth children, men birth empires. Only one is eternal.
Man, that is heavy.
So what does this all mean for us? We are looking at a worldview that demands we see the entire infrastructure of our modern, safe, comfortable world as having been built and currently maintained by men wielding extreme danger, enduring immense pain, and enforcing absolute, uncompromising hierarchy.
It is a completely unfiltered, highly aggressive perspective on evolutionary psychology, history, and the mechanics of human survival.
Which brings us to a final provocative thought for you, the listener, to mull over as you go about your day.
Yeah, this is the big question.
If, as Riker argues, human civilization is essentially an operating system coded by testosterone, fire, and dominance, what happens to that society when it decides to completely uninstall the operating system that built it?
Can a civilization actually survive if it outlaws the primal, aggressive instincts required to maintain its own foundations?
Or are we just a society of raccoons squatting in the ruins of Plenia, waiting for the building to collapse?
It is a profound, if deeply controversial question about the structural integrity of the modern world.
It really is. If you want to dive deeper into these unfiltered ideas and examine the data for yourself, I highly recommend following the author at Conrad Riker on Substack. He goes into even more depth there.
His work is certainly generating a massive, unavoidable conversation right now.
And as a final reminder, you can check Amazon Kindle and Google Playbooks right now to buy your own copy of Stone Age Mastery. It is guaranteed to make you think, whether you want to throw the book across the room or immediately move to Montana to build a bunker.
Yep, it'll get a reaction out of you, that's for sure.
Finally, please remember to like and subscribe to the show. We love bringing you these custom-tailored deep dives into the books and sources that are actively shaping our cultural conversation. Until next time, keep your Tinder dry,